Right, so no matter what gets thrown at the Houthis of Yemen, doesn't seem to be making much of a difference, does it? Yet again, US and UK forces have struck areas of Yemen, from the capital Sanaa to the port city of Hodeidah, much as they have done before on several occasions already. And it really does smack of the definition of insanity to continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Because they've done all this before. They've caused damage to Yemeni civilian life and infrastructure before. And yet the Houthis have not only weathered such attacks, but have even continued launching attacks themselves on Israel or their allies, while such attacks on them were underway. The seeming futility of pro-Israel efforts to make a difference to ongoing daily Houthi attacks on Israel itself and on shipping in the Red Sea, still that has been going on for more than a year now, has been rounded out by some astoundingly candid and uncharacteristically honest admissions where it comes to the Houthis, and how big a problem for Israel they will clearly continue to be going forwards, and deservedly so at that. Right, so this is less a series of unfortunate events. Israel and their allies frankly deserve nothing less for continuing and supporting the genocide still happening in Gaza, and more a series of deserved blows. Karma being meted out by the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen, the Houthis, as we more often call them. And it's been revealed in a series of candid admissions by US sources pointing out the struggle they've got in containing the Houthis' threat. This week, the attacks on Israel are continued on a nightly basis, always a strike at night, often a combined missile and drone attack at that, since the Israeli air defences struggle with such coordinated efforts, not to mention allied forces to them, sending Israelis scrambling for shelters, and having struck the Israeli port city of Haifa earlier this week, the Houthis' missile range can now almost reach Lebanon. And given the speed they have progressed at over the last 16 months, who would have put it beyond their capabilities before much longer to get that far and possibly be able to strike Israeli forces still stubbornly refusing to withdraw from southern Lebanon, as a theoretical possibility at least. But one of the big shocks of the last week was the attack by the Houthis on the USS Harry S. Truman, the US aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, one of the most high-profile and heavily armed targets in the Middle East right now. And not only did the Houthis apparently hit it and do some damage, but they've gone for it a second time now too. This came after yet more strikes on Yemen by US and UK forces on consecutive days, whereas on the 9th of January, areas of Sanaa, Hodeidah and Amran were struck by US and UK forces, 6 air raids in total, all of that following a bombing raid on Sanaa alone the previous night. On the 10th, though, they were joined by Israeli air forces for the first time ever in a joint tripartite attack, and a 20-strong set of warplanes struck over the course of 11 air raids the capital of Sanaa once again, this time coinciding with the weekly pro-Palestine march in the Yemeni capital, where an estimated 1 million people were out and protesting. An excerpt on this event covered by the Cradle reads, "More than 20 fighter jets took part in the attack. According to Israel's Yedioth Aharonoth, Israel's broadcasting corporation CAN said this was the first joint US-British-Israeli attack against Yemen. The attacks coincided with a statement by the Yemeni Armed Forces, YAF, which are merged with the Ansar Allah resistance movement, announcing drone and missile attacks on the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier and other US warships near the Red Sea. It also announced targeting the Tel Aviv area with 3 drones, which Israel said were shot down on Thursday night. Israeli news outlet Channel 12 said the strikes against Yemen on Friday were not a response to the drone attacks, but rather a large-scale attack that was planned in advance, as part of a change in Israel's policy towards Yemen. It added that preparations have begun for a Yemeni response against Israel. The US and UK have stepped up their raids against Yemen in further attempts to deter Sanaa from continuing its pro-Palestine naval operations against Israeli-linked interests and US warships in the Red Sea area. Israel, despite dealing with a significant intelligence gap in Yemen, has recently launched large-scale attacks on the country and has vowed to continue its campaign in response to direct Yemeni drone and missile attacks against Tel Aviv and other areas in Israel. Israeli officials have made threats against Yemeni leadership recently. Sanaa's security forces announced this week that they foiled a UK-Saudi espionage plot aimed at gathering intelligence on military targets and state leaders in the country. Meanwhile, Sanaa has repeatedly asserted that it will not cease its operations until the war in Gaza is brought to an end. So the US, the UK and Israel have ganged up on Yemen together for the first time ever, in order to defend Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza at that, against a nation having none of it. And as you might have picked up on, whilst that tripartite attack on Yemen was going on, the Houthis were announcing the fact they'd actually hit the USS Harry S. Truman for the second time. The attacks being meted out on Yemen are blind, after all. The lack of intelligence is telling. And all they are actually doing is attacking more civilian areas and not slowing the Houthis down in the slightest. It's not as though attempts to gather intelligence haven't been made, though. This channel discussed the foiling of that attempted joint spy mission by the UK and Saudi forces the other day. It was so embarrassingly poor. And to think the people they sent in had apparently been trained by MI6. James Bond, they absolutely weren't. But the second attack on the US aircraft carrier again reinforces the determination and emboldenment of the Houthis, not afraid to take on any target. And it wasn't the only warship targeted apparently this time either, as a combination once more of cruise missile and explosive-laden drones descended upon the Red Sea, determined to wreak as much havoc as they could. And all of this apparently happening during the operations by the US, the UK and Israel, with their attacks preceding the strikes on the Truman and continuing afterwards. The Houthis having claimed to have foiled an attempted airstrike from the carrier itself through their attack, implying the actual strikes on Yemen might have been intended to be larger than was actually seen, larger than Israel, the US and UK seem to be bragging about. But we only have their word on such matters, I suppose. But it is the admissions following all of this that have struck a chord most of all. You see, these attacks on the Truman and Israel mark the anniversary of the first attempts to stop the Houthis in their attacks at that point on shipping on the Red Sea. Operation Prosperity Guardian, remember that one, and Operation Poseidon Archer. The former supposedly to stop the Houthis at sea with their dinghies and their drones, harassing shipping as it was. The latter a US and UK attempt to take out Yemeni infrastructure and cripple the country economically, much as they're still trying to do, it seems. But given what the Houthis are capable of now, reaching Israel, reaching the Arabian and Mediterranean seas as well as the Red Sea, when way back when it was just drones and cheap dinghies harassing shipping in the Red Sea, shows what catastrophic failures both those operations have actually been. The attacks on Yemeni infrastructure still ongoing. And in what way has it ever slowed them down? Yemen is already a poor nation, and the people there, despite that, still stand with Palestine. That's why 1 million of them were out protesting in Sanaa. The West cannot wrap their heads around this. They blew it. Not only were the Houthis able to keep going, but they've advanced their capabilities massively at the same time. Military failure really just doesn't get any bigger than that. But following this has come the admission that they failed to beat the Houthis and that actually they're still winning, and that perhaps the US are admitting at last they simply cannot beat the Houthis. You see, when Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh was asked about the US attacks on Yemen, she made this claim. So when it comes to the Houthis, nothing has changed about Operation Prosperity Guardian. That still remains intact and is there to continue to degrade Houthi capabilities, but also to protect commercial shipping and our ships and allied ships and coalition ships that go through the Red Sea and the BAM, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. When it comes to our policy on the Houthis, we never said we were going to take every capability off the map. What we did say is that we were going to continue to work to degrade capabilities and to ensure upholding the international rules-based order and the free flow of commerce through that region. We continue to be successful in our strikes, but again, we're not going to be able to take them off the map every capability. But every single time that we conduct a dynamic strike, that further degrades their capabilities. Does it though? Does it really? Who believes you? Come on, put your hands up. Given you don't really know where the Houthis' military capabilities are because you have this massive gap in intelligence, and the fact you have failed to put even the slightest dent in their ongoing daily actions, their daily routine now strikes on Red Sea shipping and targets in Israel, it's a US admission of failure against them, frankly, hidden behind typical press secretary doublespeak. But is nonetheless an admission that the US doesn't think it can win. And this really should not be a surprise to anyone because they've tried fighting the Houthis before and got nowhere then either. The aim is not to completely wipe out the Houthis' capability, they say, and that is pretty much because they know it is impossible to do without knowing where it all is. Understatement of the year. This is the value of gathering military intelligence, and they can't even do that. They've tried and failed at that now as well, as aforementioned. Nevertheless, it seems plans remain afoot to carry on butting heads with the Houthis, but who would bet on the West and Israel against them these days? Meanwhile, if you hadn't picked up that story of British and Saudi attempted infiltration of the Houthis to gather that intelligence, get all the details of that absolute farce and some other stories besides that have sent Israel into complete meltdown this week in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so to help support the channel and ensure you don't miss out on more new daily content, all very much appreciated as that is, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.